Let's enter the full screen. All right, welcome to this Bernie Sanders Brigade live stream. I decided to do this live stream to basically talk about the elections, midterm elections of 2018, and to take a look at some of the results and to analyze them. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to be taking a look at the electoral map as it exists at the moment. Currently, right now, the Democratic Party gained 28 seats in this last midterm election. They're at 223 members of the House of Representatives. And of course, the Republican Party has lost 28 seats in the House of Representatives, and they're currently at 197 seats. This would basically make it a total of 520 seats that have been declared at the moment. This is what the electoral map currently looks like. Again, this is the United States House of Representatives map district by district. One of the things that you'll notice from this map is the entire swath of red. By the way, red represents the districts that the Republican Party won in this election. A lot of these areas, of course, only have like one congressional seat. So, for instance, in the state of Montana, there's only one, they only have one representative. And the same is true in states like North Dakota, South Dakota. There's only one representative in the entire state. In the state of Nebraska, they have appears to be 3 districts. District 1, which was won by a Republican, District 2, and District 3. And if you notice that all 3 districts in Nebraska were won by a Republican incumbent. And if you can see right there that, for instance, in Nebraska District number 3, Adrian Smith was declared the winner with 76% of the popular vote. And he happened to be the incumbent. He happened to basically run for re-election, and he was unanimously re-elected in this last election. So a lot of these areas that you see that are red, compared to states like California, for instance, or New York, or even Texas, don't have really a lot of people living there, comparing when you compare them to these big states like California, Texas, New York, and Pennsylvania. However, it does, you have to point out here that the Republican Party is really winning a lot of these districts in the Midwest, and of course in the South and the Deep South. So that's one of the things that you notice from this map, looking at the outcome of the 2018 midterm elections. The popular vote, Democrats won 51,533,576 votes, with the Republican Party scoring over 47 million popular votes. Now, the popular vote is not an indicator that a political party will take control of the United States House of Representatives. And the reason that is due to districting. And what's districting? Well, every 10 years, the United States does what's called a census. And our next census will be held in 2020. And what the federal government does is that they try to collect information regarding population and other statistics in the country. So every state is actually allocated a number of districts depending on the number of population that that state has. So, for example, currently right now, California has 53 districts. They have the most because this is the state that has the highest population in the country. So what happens is that each state gets basically a number allocated. And when you take all 50 states in the US, including Alaska and Hawaii, of course, it comes out to the number 437. That's basically a very important number. When you add 2 senators for each state, that comes out to 100 senators. So there are 537 electoral votes in every presidential election year, and then we'll get to that later. So this is what the map looks like. And if you look at, notice that in the South, there's very few areas that are blue, just some districts that are sporadically, the Democrats basically picked up in this election. And I don't know why that happened right now. Okay. So that's basically it right there for the United States House of Representatives. Over on the Senate, the Democratic Party at the moment actually lost 2 seats, a net loss of 2 seats. But what's interesting here is that in this last election, the Democrats actually won 56.9% of the popular vote in these Senate races. And I don't know how many, I think there was something like 35 Senate races that were up for grabs. Every 2 years, about 33 or 34 senators are up for re-election. They rotate because it's a 6-year term, and they have what they call a class each 2 years. So they don't all run at the same time. The only people in Congress that run every 2 years are all 437 members of the United States House of Representatives. So, and if you look here, the Republican Party won 41% of the popular vote, yet they picked up being 2 seats. And the reason that occurred was because the Democratic Party, if you look here in the state of Indiana, Joe Donnelly was the incumbent. Well, Mike Brown defeated Joe Donnelly by 51.6% of the vote. So that seat basically was picked up by the Republicans. And over in the state of Missouri, Joel Hawley defeated the incumbent Claire McCaskill with 51% of 51.5% of the vote. So these were basically they barely won the majority with a little bit over 50% of the vote. Over in North Dakota, Kevin Cramer defeated Heidi Heitkamp with 55.4% of the vote. Over in the state of Arizona, that race has not been declared at the moment, with 99% of the precincts reporting. Martha McSally, the Republican, is so far leading with 49.4% to the Democrat Kirsten Sinema, 48.4% of the popular vote. And if you look there, what's interesting there is that the Green Party candidate, Angela Green, actually won 2.2% of the vote. So those 38,000 votes actually did probably make a difference. And again, focusing on the Green Party is not necessarily an indicator if the Green Party decided not to run a candidate. You can't assume that all 38,000 of those voters would vote for the Democratic Party candidate. A lot of them probably would not decide actually to sit out the elections. There are those voters who are so disenchanted with the 2-party system that they either don't vote, or if they do vote, they vote for a minor party. So this race hasn't been declared. This is actually the seat that Senator Jeff Flake actually it was actually his seat, and he decided not to run again. So it was actually believed that Donald Trump was going to pour a lot of money in the Republican Party primary to defeat Jeff Flake so that he can get a candidate who was more pro-Trump, uh, and so forth. And it was basically Trump was basically unhappy at some of the comments that Jeff Flake made. So Flake just decided not to run. And most likely he decided not to run because I think he knew that he was going to lose. Because what's happening with the Trump effect is that any Republican Party candidate that runs in a primary who's actually not endorsed by Trump, and where there is a candidate who's actually being endorsed by Trump, they're actually the Trump candidate is actually defeating the person who's not favored by Trump. So that's a very interesting observation that the Republican Party really has become, in some cases, if you think about it, the party of Trump. So that's interesting what's going on there in the state of Arizona. The Democrats are just like 1 percentage point of actually flipping that seat, but unfortunately, it seems like they're going to come up short. Over in Florida, it appears that the Republicans, now this race has not been declared yet. I believe there might be a runoff because the difference here is just 30,000 votes. But currently, the Republican candidate, I believe he's the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, is leading by 30,264 votes. That's a razor thin margin. And if he is declared the winner, that's another seat that the Republicans will actually flip and pick up because Bill Nelson is the incumbent. And that will increase their total to 52 to the Democrats' 46 at the moment. And I'm not sure if these numbers also indicate, I think that might be the last race that's actually not declared yet. There are 46 declared Democrats, but there are actually 2 independents, like Bernie Sanders, who won with 67%. He was reelected. And the independent senator Angus King of Maine, and he won his reelection. Both of these senators caucus with the Democrats, so that would actually boost their numbers to 48 to 51. So I believe that this Senate seat, if once it's declared, it's probably going to give the Republicans a net gain of 3 seats in this election, and that's important to note. One of the race that was important to note was the race in West Virginia. Joe Manchin's considered a centrist Democrat. He actually voted to confirm the Trump Supreme Court nominee, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and he was the only Democrat to vote for him. And what was interesting is that the senators who actually voted against him all lost. So there is some indication from some analysts who believe that Joe Manchin probably did the political savvy move to support Brett Kavanaugh, because knowing that had he probably not supported had he voted no, he probably would have lost this election. So that was a very contentious, the Stop Kavanaugh hashtag and just that movement from the Me Too that was trying to pressure a lot of these Democratic candidates, and some of the moderate Republicans like Susan Collins of Maine. She's not up for re-election. She will be up for re-election in 2020. She's part of the other class, the next class that will of 33 plus senators that are going to come up for re-election. So those groups did try to pressure those centrist Republicans like Susan Collins, and since she decided to vote for Brett Kavanaugh, there's actually a group that actually I think is doing some type of GoFundMe or crowd pack. I don't recall, but they're actually trying to raise money to provide it to her opponent so that she will basically lose her reelection in 2020. Okay, so I guess we're getting away from what we're supposed to be looking at is these U.S. House of Representative races and the U.S. Senate races. So currently, just to recap, Democrats so far have picked up 28 seats in the House. They'll probably pick up a couple more. There are a couple of other races, I believe, that have not been called. So there's this race here in California's District 25. So I think that the check marks there indicate who's already been declared the winner. And if you look at that race right now, the Democrat is ahead 51.3%. And the reason they don't declare them, it's so the margin, the difference between the candidates is so slim that they might either call for a recount in some of these races. So if the Democrat there is declared the winner, and by the way, in that seat, California District 25, it's actually held right now by a Republican incumbent. So the Democrats will actually, if Katie Hill is declared the winner, the Democrats will have flipped California District 25. So that would give them a net gain, just after that race alone, that would give them a net gain of 29. If you look at over here in Utah, this has not been declared yet. You see that there's no check mark yet. The Democrat is beating the Republican incumbent 51.3 to 48.7. So that seat will give the Democrats another pickup. It's going to increase their net gain to 30. Okay, and here's another seat in Washington's District 8. And this again is probably also going to, the Democrats are going to pick up this seat as well. So it looks like that the Democrats, and here's another one, the New York District 22 is held by a Republican incumbent right now, and the Democrat is barely winning by 50.3%. So it's depending on what the laws are in that state or local district. I think it's a state law. Depending on their state election laws, if they, because every state has different rules, and the U.S. Constitution doesn't have a uniform federal election rules. They basically leave it up to the states to conduct their own elections. So there are some states that basically have laws that say if the race is this close by this much, there's an automatic recount. Okay, and the amount it basically depends on what each state decides it is. Then there are other states that don't have an automatic recount. And I was reading something that the state of Wisconsin, where it's actually currently held by let's see here, this is supposed to be the gubernatorial map right over here. Over in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, this governor's race has been flipped, and there was some type of law I read that was passed in the state that will actually prevent him from requesting a recount. So there will not be a recount in the state of Wisconsin. With that note, looking at the U.S. governor's election results, the Democrats actually did much better in these governor's races. They actually picked up a net gain of 7 seats, and with a 49.2% of the popular vote to the Republicans' 48.4%. And so far, Republicans have lost 6 seats. Now, it says 6 because the state of Georgia, currently right now, Brian Kemp is actually winning by 50.3% to Stacey Abrams' 48.7%, and that race has not been called because it's just a 63,000 vote difference, and Stacey Abrams is not conceded yet. and we don't know what's going to happen there. Actually, Brian Kemp right now is currently the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, and there are accusations of voter suppression. There are allegations that a lot of the precincts that were predominantly minority precincts, that a lot of the vote machines were actually not working. In some precincts only had, I read something that they only had like 3 voting machines that were actually working. And in some cases, some of the vote machines, the power was actually, the voting machines were actually not working, and it was happening in mostly predominantly minority, predominantly African American precincts. So that's the controversy there in the state of Georgia at the moment. Voter suppression has been a problem in states like Georgia and Florida, even dating back recently to the 2000 elections. So that's basically the recap right there. The Democrats have basically gained 7 seats in the governor's races. So currently the Republicans have 26 control of 26 state houses, with the Democrats controlling 23, which was much better because I think before this election, Republicans had 33. And it looks like the Democrats are probably going to get a net gain of 6. Race here in Georgia is going to be called for Brian Kemp. So, and if you look at the governor's races, the Democrats actually really performed very well. Now, with that being said, how does this midterm election in 2018 compare to previous midterm elections where the president's party actually either performed well or did not perform well? So we're going to be taking a look right now at some of the results in the previous midterm elections to kind of get a comparison of how the other party did against the Democratic president, or the president who happened to be the Democrat who was holding office. So we're going to take a look here at the previous midterm election, the first midterm election that the previous president, Barack Obama, had. And this, if we recall, Barack Obama was elected in the presidential election of 2008. The first midterm elections, which are considered a mandate for every sitting president, for Barack Obama, in Barack Obama's case, it was held 2 years later in 2010. Barack Obama had control of the House and the Senate. Before, if you look at this map here, it says before the election, he actually had 255 Democrats in the United States House of Representatives. At the conclusion of the 2010 midterm elections, the Republican Party actually gained 63 seats. So they needed 39 seats to take control of the United States House of Representatives. So before this election, they had about roughly 179 seats, the Republicans, and then they increased their lead to 242. And the Democrats lost 63. And this is what the map looked like, the electoral map in the House looked like in that year. So if you take a comparison of the election that just happened in 2018, where the Democrats actually only needed 23 seats, and they looks like so far they picked up 28. Even if the Democrats pick up those seats that I mentioned earlier, so it's going to probably increase their net gain to 30 something. So let's say they got 30 seats or 31 or even 33. Comparing that to the 2010 results, actually the Republicans actually fared 2 times better than how the Democrats performed in this last midterm election. So the initial predictions of a blue wave actually did not occur, because really this, if you think about it, this election in 2010, this was a red wave. Okay. And they don't, unfortunately, here they don't have the number of the popular vote, which would really make it interesting, because we can really compare how many people actually voted to this last election. And I believe that in this midterm election, I read something that about 39 or close to 40% of the people actually turned out to vote, which was much higher than the last midterm, which was 2014. So usually in midterm elections, what happens is that most registered voters don't actually turn out to vote. And that actually gives the advantage to more conservative voters, especially, and that gives the advantage to the Republican Party, who actually has more conservative voters. So people who are older, over 40 years old or 50, 60 years old, they tend to go out and vote. And the more affluent that you are, you tend to actually vote in almost every election. The younger you are, the less money that you actually earn for a living, the less likely you're actually to turn out to vote in, especially midterm elections. One good thing about this last election is that it looks like a lot of people did turn out to vote. Still not a majority of the people, but compared to previous midterm elections, it was a lot better. So usually when people turn out to vote, it actually gives the Democrats the advantage. Fortunately, in this case, in the House, we did not really see, this is not really a blue wave at all. If you just take a look at the last midterm election, the first midterm of Obama. Now, let's see here. Over in the Senate in 2010, if you take a look here, the Republicans actually picked up 5 seats. I'm sorry. Yeah, they actually picked up 5 seats. They needed 10 seats for control. And the Democrats actually lost 6 seats. So they had a negative 6. Before the election, the Democrats had 59 seats. So then they went down to 53. Okay. And again, looking at just comparing and contrasting that result. So the Republican Party in 2010, they were the opposition party. The opposition party gained 5 seats. In this last election, the opposition party lost at least 2 seats, and probably it's going to be 3. So, but yet they got the highest amount of popular vote. So again, if you take a look at the results, comparing them to the 2010 election, this is really a mixed result. Yes, the Democrats did well in the House, but in the Senate they fared very poorly. Now, we have to remember also that in this last election, there were actually more Democrats that were up for re-election. So it was actually hard for the it was an uphill battle for Democrats to actually regain control of the Senate, because the majority of these 33 or 35 people who were up for re-election were actually Democrats. So that actually gave the advantage to the Republicans in this election. However, a state like Florida is considered a swing state, and the fact that the Democrats, it appears at the moment that the Democrats in the Senate races and in the gubernatorial races did not win is really a warning sign of what might lie ahead. Because if this is the case, Florida is is one of the key swing states. That's the state that gave basically the election to President George W. Bush in 2000, and that basically made the difference when the Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore actually ruled in favor of Bush in that Supreme Court decision, giving Bush all of the electoral votes in the state of Florida. And Bush won, I think, the state of Florida by something like 500 votes. It was a very small margin. It was something like 200 or 500 of votes. So Florida is a very key swing state, and the fact that and it's gone Democrat in the last couple of elections. I think Barack Obama carried the state of Florida, I believe, in both elections. I'd have to check that out later to see if that's true. I know he won it in 2008. The fact that the Democrats are having a difficult time defeating these Republican candidates in the Senate races and the statewide race indicates that the Democratic candidate, whoever she or he will be in 2020, may have a difficult time of defeating Donald Trump in a state like Florida. So that's basically a red flag that you have to take into account. You have to also take into account that in 2020 and in all presidential elections, it's not the popular vote that matters, but it's actually who wins most of the states and who wins 270 electoral votes. So states like these swing states like Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and even Illinois and Pennsylvania, these are considered swing states because they haven't gone solidly for one party or another. They've gone some years for the Democrats and in other years for the Republicans. So, for instance, in the state of Wisconsin, it's been, in the governor's races, it's been Republican in the last 8 years. And Scott Walker was running for his re-election for his third term, so he lost. So Wisconsin is a swing state. And so that's also something to look at, the state of states like the state of Wisconsin, because in order for Donald Trump to actually retain control of the White House in 2020, he's going to have to do well in these states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And I say that because in this last presidential election, let me see if I can, God, I have so many tabs here. Here it is. So in the last presidential election, where Trump gained 304 electoral votes, see, he won the state of Florida. So that's 29 electoral votes. So if the Democrats can pick up 29 and keep the other states that Clinton won, the Democratic candidate will actually have not 227, but 256 electoral votes, and they would just need 14 more for 270. Right? That's the magic number. The warning sign here for the Republicans is that in this governor's race that we just had, the Republicans actually lost these seats here in Michigan and Wisconsin. And if you look here, Michigan is worth 16 electoral votes and Wisconsin is worth 10. So if the governor's race is an indicator of how well the political party, the Republicans, will do in 2020, they might end up actually losing those states that I just mentioned there, Wisconsin and Michigan. So Clinton lost both those states. So in this last election, Gretchen Whitmer won the governor's race, 53% of the vote, and over in Wisconsin, the incumbent the incumbent Scott Walker was defeated. So if Democrats can flip both these states and take Florida, then they'll take and keep control of the other states that Clinton won, the Democrats will have enough to actually defeat Trump in this election. Those are big ifs, okay? Because if you take a look at this map, all that red, and you take a look at this House map here, I mean, the maps look almost identical, okay? And I know we're looking at the presidential election results here, so we're not looking at it district by district. But, however, I think it does say something that a lot of these districts, it appears, are either supporting Trump or they're actually voting against the Democratic Party. And that should basically be a concern for the Democratic Party and for all leftists, because if Donald Trump gets reelected, we will have another, starting from now till the end of his second term, so we're going to have 6 more years of Trump and his policies that are anti-worker, anti-immigrant, anti-minority, anti-female, anti-LGBTQ, and that he's just basically going to continue implementing policies like the tax cuts that actually benefit the 1/10 of the 1% or the 1%. And that's really what he's there for. He uses issues like immigration as basically a smokescreen to basically confuse the working class about what the real issues are. So he wants to confuse the working class into thinking that it's because of immigrants that they're losing their jobs. And there's no mention, of course, of the actions that corporations like Walmart or other corporations take to actually limit workers' rights or workers' attempts to try to unionize, or the fact that the role that automation plays in actually decreasing the amount of jobs. So the elections in 2020 should be a concern for everyone on the left. And this map here in the House of Representatives really should be a cause of concern for all people on the left, and even the establishment people, because it's really, you look at it, it's very stark, and it's a lot of these states like this, like Ohio, and all these districts just going red, 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 and Ohio is a swing state, and Trump won the state of Ohio and the state of Pennsylvania in the last election. And so it's not always an indicator of how the parties will do, of course, in the Senate races, for example, because if you look here, the Democrats, the progressive, Sherrod Brown won. He retained his seat, 53.2%. It wasn't overwhelming. And in Pennsylvania, Bob Casey regained control of his seat. So U.S. House races, Senate races are not really an indicator of how well a presidential candidate will do, but I think it should be taken into consideration, especially House races, because you're getting a microscopic picture of how the country is actually voting. And the first midterm election of a sitting president is actually considered a referendum on him. Okay. And once again, 51% to 47%, it's not a big difference there between the parties, Okay. So that's those elections. And again, when we're comparing them from previous midterms, you look at the governor's races on the last midterm election, Obama's first midterm, Democrats actually lost. The party in power lost 6 seats, and the party in the opposition won 6. So in this case, the Democrats actually did as well as Republicans performed in the 2010 election. So they actually, the governor's races were actually better, were almost identical results to what the Republicans performed in the election of 2010. So in the House, yes, the Democrats, comparing this midterm to the 2010, did okay, but not as well as Republicans performed. They did poorly in the Senate, but they performed just as well as Republicans did in the governor's races. In the Bush's 2002, his midterm election, this was basically an anomaly, and I'm going to explain this later. So we've already stated that usually the party in power, the party who has the White House, control of the White House, usually what happens historically is that in their first midterm, they tend to end up losing seats because usually the public either gets excited about that presidential candidate, and then after 2 years, they don't like what that guy, it's always been a guy. They don't like what that guy's been doing. And that's been happening a lot, especially in recent history. 2002 was the first midterm election that President George W. Bush had. In this case, the Republicans, his party, actually picked up 2 seats and 8 House seats. So instead of losing seats, the party in power actually gained. The reason that's so is, this is Wikipedia, of course. The reason is actually explained in the next paragraph, the very first sentence. It says right here, we read on, these elections were held just a little under 14 months after the September 11, 2001 attacks. So that's why that was an anomaly. Bush's popularity went from something like, he was in the 40% before 9/11, right around 40 something percent, and it shot up to like 90% approval rating after 9/11. And if you remember, after the Twin Towers fell, Bush went over to the site and was on top of the rubble with one of the rescue workers and said that the people who knocked down these towers will hear from us soon. And that really rallied the people to support the president in his war in Afghanistan and eventually the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq, though, was a little bit more controversial, more contentious, yet the president maintained a lot of popular support through most of the war, pretty much. He ended up getting reelected in 2004, defeating John Kerry. So that's why that midterm election was an anomaly, because it came 14 months after 9/11. So it's not really a good indicator of like how well Bush would have performed without 9/11. But again, it's also interesting to note what an event like a crisis, like an attack like 9/11, can do to a sitting president. They can just get reelected, or have their party. They can get reelected, or their party can actually gain seats in midterm elections. A complete turnaround to what's usually the norm. And the president before George Bush was a Democrat by the name of Bill Clinton. His first midterm election was in 1994. So he was elected in 1992. And his party had control of both the House and the Senate. And this is how they performed. Let's see here. I had the numbers. Jesus Christ. I shouldn't say Jesus Christ. Oh my God, I lost. Okay, so these are numbers of I guess demographics of who actually went Republican. You're looking at numbers like 1992 to 1994. I think that's why I picked them. So anyway, this is what the map looked like in 1994. The outcome. The areas in dark blue are districts that actually Democrats held. Okay. So places like these states here. Okay. And this state. I think this is Oklahoma. I forget what this state is here. I think this is New Mexico. And I think this is Arizona. So these are all the districts that the Democrats held. Now, the areas here in this light purplish color, like here the state of Maine, this district, were actually Democratic gains. These are seats that they flipped. The dark red areas are districts that Republicans held in 1994. The light red areas are districts that Republicans flipped, that Republicans actually gained in 1994. So if you look at how many seats Democrats flipped to how many seats Republicans flipped, it's just the differences it's very stark. You can see completely that Republicans actually took more seats from the Democrats, way more than the Democrats did. In yellow, it's an independent hold. So this independent who held this seat in the state of Vermont, so I believe the state of Vermont only has one district, or I think they might have two, or forget what the shape of Vermont looks like. So anyway, this seat was actually held at that time by Bernie Sanders. So he actually held and he of course caucused with the Democrats all this time. Okay, so that's what that looked like in 1994. And over on, let me see here. Did I get the Jesus Christ? Okay, that's the Senate race, but I wanted to take a look at how well, here it is. So this is what I wanted to take a look at. The Republicans actually in that year, in 1994, actually had a net gain of 54 seats. So they actually gained 54 and Democrats lost 54. So before the 1994 midterm elections, Republicans had control of 176 districts. Remember, you need 218. That's the magic number. You need 218 to have control of the House of Representatives. After the election of 1994, Republicans had control of 230 districts. I mean, this was a wipeout. And if you take a look at the popular vote numbers, 36.5 million people who were registered to vote and who voted Republican, while only 31.6% of people who were registered to vote and did vote voted Democrat. So over in the House, this was really excruciating defeat for Democrats. It was so bad that the Democrats actually lost Tom Foley. Well, they didn't lose. Well, yeah, they lost him. But Tom Foley was actually the Speaker of the House at the time. And it was the election results in 1994 was so embarrassing that the leader of the Democratic Party in the House actually lost his re-election. So he was from Washington's 5th district, and Tom Foley lost that seat. And the Speaker of the House, the person who became Speaker of the House, who replaced Tom Foley, was actually a Republican by the name of Newt Gingrich. Okay, so that's the results in the House in 1994, and in 1994's Senate results, the Republicans actually picked up a net gain of 9 seats. They went from 43 U.S. Senate seats to 52, while Democrats went from 57 to 48 seats. And if I recall correctly, I think the Senate Majority Leader also lost his re-election. Yes, it was George Mitchell. Oh, it says here he retired. No, he didn't lose his seats. And I'm mixing him up with this guy named Tom Daschle, where there was an election where he was actually defeated. He was the Senate Majority Leader for the Democrats. Yeah, but it wasn't this race. So that's what happened over on the Senate. Again, the opposition party gained 9 seats over on the. So that's it. And then this is what the electoral map, the U.S. Senate map, looked like for that year. So if you notice here, just there's a lot of red. I think these colors here, the light red, are states that the Republicans picked up. So this that's basically a comparison and an analysis of looking at the midterm elections in 1994, 2010. So any casual observer who knows that information would have to assume that the Democrats actually did not perform as well as Republicans did in the House, and in the Senate they performed much more poorly than Republicans performed in previous midterm elections like 1994 and 2010. And if we recall, 2002 was an anomaly because it happened after 9/11, so that's not really a good indicator of how well Democrats should have done at all. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to take a look at, just comparing the last midterm elections and what I think might happen in 2020. So based on all of this information, I think that there is a very strong possibility that Donald Trump might get reelected president in 2020. Just looking at how well Democrats, or how poorly in some cases, they perform. So in order for the Democrats to retake control of the White House, they had to win in the swing districts that went red in this last election. So even a state like Indiana, where Democrats had control in the Senate, that's a state. How well did Trump have that? Yeah, he has that. And so that's a state that Trump might keep control of in 2020 because they've just won that Senate race. And over in the House, they pretty much, with the exception, I believe, of District 7, they've pretty much won most of the other surrounding districts in the state of Indiana. So I think that that's the only district that actually Democrats have won in the state of Indiana. So the Indiana might stay red in 2020. And if you look at Illinois, this should really concern Democrats because a lot of these districts in these have gone red. So if you look over here, where's the district that Jesus Garcia? Well, I can't see it here. It's so small here. But anyway, yeah. So if Illinois goes for Trump, and if you look here, Illinois, the Democrats actually looks like they picked up this seat in the state of Illinois because it was actually a seat held by a Republican incumbent, Bruce Browner, and this seat was actually. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the governor's races. So yeah, the governors. So they picked up that governor's seat in the state of Illinois. It's gone from red to blue. And on the Senate, did they have none? So there was no Senate seat up for re-election this year. So again, who knows what will happen in 2020? You have a lot of red in a lot of these districts in Illinois, and there might be a possibility that, who knows? We don't know, but Trump. You never know. Trump might flip the state of Illinois. That's certainly not out of. Should not be basically taken out of consideration. All right. So that's basically it for today's live stream. I want to thank all of you for joining the Bernie Sanders Brigade live stream. We just analyzed the 2018 midterm elections. Thank you for those of you who've actually joined this live stream. It's currently right now 12:20 midnight, 3:20 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, 12:20 over in Pacific Standard Time. So I haven't done this in a long time, and it just has taken me over an hour to try to get this live stream up. So just this app here on YouTube is just very confusing. It's not very. I don't think it's very user friendly. But anyway, I digress. So thank you so much for joining. I'm going to leave you right now with this music. And thank you so much for joining. This is a Bernie Sanders Brigade. Thank you very much. Hopefully we will be doing more live streams in the near future looking at these U.S. House of Representatives races. So I'll try to do more looking at in depth at this, the last midterm election. Thank you very much for those of you who've joined us. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.